Many open-world games like Metroid use upgrades as a form of progression, and while every Metroid game's upgrade system appears very similar, there's a lot of effort that has to go into making a great upgrade system. And upon close inspection, Samus Returns' upgrade system is very clearly flawed, and the game definitely suffers for it. In the case of Samus Returns, it's not the upgrades themselves but how they're used. Upgrades in Samus Returns are rarely used to overcome an obstacle, but just used to clear arbitrary barriers, like doors that are only usable with certain beam types, or blocks that can only be moved with the grapple beam. The problem with every obstacle being so unremarkable is that it defeats the purpose of upgrades even being upgrades, if they're all just used as keys to open arbitrarily locked doors. This also means that upgrades are never exciting to find like in other games, since they serve very few purposes, and because there's usually only one way to get past barriers, you find that most of the time when you come across upgrades you won't be able to get them anyway, since they're usually unreachable without an upgrade found much later in the game. In Super Metroid, unlike Samus Returns, when finding upgrades, there's actually some challenge you have to overcome to get the upgrade. And because it's not an arbitrarily locked door with only one solution, there are far fewer instances when you don't have the proper upgrade to pass. Upgrades are also more rewarding to find since they are used much better as tools to overcome unique obstacles, rather than keys to open locked doors. Metroid games are well known for the freedom they give you when exploring the world, and this is arguably the most important element of a Metroid game. Super Metroid is well known for this, but Samus Returns on the other hand is the exact opposite, and once again it suffers for it. In Super Metroid, each region has a few main paths, with many branching paths leading to upgrades. Many parts of the map also loop back to the main pathway, so it doesn't take too much time to go to where you need to get to, especially when returning to old areas to find more upgrades. The map is specifically designed to not get boring, but what really makes Super Metroid's world shine is the ability to go anywhere using advanced abilities like bomb jumping and wall jumping, even if you're not meant to go there yet. Escaping the intended path is hugely rewarding, since it's often very difficult to get there, but the players who use wall jumping and bomb jumping to break the main sequence are also probably the same people to appreciate a challenge. The game is so open that if you wanted to, you could actually beat all the bosses in reverse order. This amount of freedom is what makes this game significantly more replayable than Samus Returns. Samus Returns, on the other hand, actually has a far more open-ended world than Super Metroid, but most of those ends are dead. What the game lacks is player choice. There's always a set destination you have to go to, and there are only a small amount of ways to get there. If this wasn't bad enough, the game actually goes out of its way to limit freedom, like making the wall jump no longer work up one wall, and having red spikes or yellow slime stopping you from using the spider ball. Even bomb jumping, which was once the most reliable way to ascend any height without the space jump, is now mostly useless, since anywhere it could be useful, there's these air vents which just get rid of any placed bombs. But even more annoying than that is the map layout. I know that it was based off of a Game Boy game from 25 years ago, but the way the rooms are laid out make the world very annoying to traverse. And even though each area is much smaller than the ones in Super Metroid, they take much longer to travel across. And while in Super Metroid the level design guided you where you need to go, in Samus Returns there might be one small tunnel that leads you to your target. These factors make the world very tedious to navigate and inferior to the one in Super Metroid. Combat is rarely the focus of any Metroid game, except for that one time, but in any other Metroid game, if the combat is done poorly, it can severely break the flow of gameplay where it's implemented. This doesn't happen in Super Metroid, but it definitely happens in Samus Returns. A new feature in Samus Returns is the ability to use your arm cannon to counter enemy attacks. This also makes them take a lot less hits to be killed afterward, so it's by far the easiest way to get past enemies. And while this mechanic is probably meant to serve as a supplement to the main shooting attacks, because beam attacks by themselves take forever to actually kill an enemy, this attack is the quickest way to deal with enemies without wasting missiles. The problem with that is that sometimes the enemy can take a couple of seconds to attack, so you're often just awkwardly standing next to the enemy, waiting for them to lunge at you. This is a problem because it means that most of the time the enemy controls the flow of gameplay rather than the player. Many of the enemies are also just poorly designed. Most are smaller than the regular arm cannon height, so you have to either crouch or use free aim to shoot them. One type of enemy stays in a group, so you have to use the quick shooting Aeon ability, and others are only killable with missiles. What all of these enemies share in common is that in order to defeat them, you have to switch different abilities on or off up to 3 times before being able to actually shoot them. So if more than one enemy catch you off guard at the same time, it takes too long to switch to the appropriate weapons, so you have to either run away and set the proper weapons, or just try and run around them. In Super Metroid, most of the enemies only take a couple of hits, so they can be passed easily. But the game also recognizes its limited shooting controls, so instead of adding unnecessary abilities like free aim, it designs its enemies accordingly, like making them jump in arcs which can be easily hit when aiming at a 45-degree angle. It also knows that because it takes a long time to switch to missiles, most enemies are killable with only beam weapons. And if you think about it, having to kill enemies weak to missiles doesn't add any challenge in any way, it just makes them more tedious to kill. So what does this mean? I never had the intention of disliking Samus Returns. I wish it were as good as Super Metroid. But what this game shows is that there is much more to a Metroid game than just collecting upgrades and exploring an open world. It's no wonder that Super Metroid is still the best of its genre.